Welcome to our podcast, where we regularly read analysis of the most popular books among students. Confrontation between nations and the development of politics against the backdrop of rivalry. In 1992, Samuel Huntington presented the central argument of what would become the clash of civilizations in a lecture. Huntington was the first scholar to argue that cultural identity would be the most critical factor in shaping global politics after the Cold War. The following year, he developed this idea into an article in the magazine Foreign Affairs entitled The Clash of Civilizations. Only in 1996, after further developing his thesis and defending it from criticism, did Huntington expand his idea into an entire book. Before we move on to the Clash of Civilizations summary, we want to remind you that if you are faced with a challenging academic paper on a similar topic, you can always ask for help from EssayShark experts. Huntington's text addresses the structure of global politics in the post-Cold War world. After the Cold War ended and the world was no longer dominated by the two superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union, how were international affairs reorganized? How can we characterize the balance of power in the world today? And where does Western civilization fit into the mix? Huntington answers these questions by focusing on the recent rise of 7 or 8 major civilizations. His central argument is that culture and cultural identity shape the patterns of conflict, coming together, and splitting apart international institutions in the post-Cold War world. With the end of the Cold War, countries stopped defining themselves by the ideologies they aligned with. They could no longer turn to their status as communist or capitalist nations to express themselves and their place in the international order. Instead, countries began to emphasize their cultural identity. This emphasis on culture meant that no country was exempt from determining where it stood. States no longer asked each other, "Whose side are you on?" but "Who are you?" This second question is impossible to avoid. The 5 sections of Huntington's text present different components of this central argument regarding the importance of cultural identity. In the first part, Huntington argues that global politics have become multipolar and multi-civilizational. In other words, the world contains multiple major powers and civilizations that interact internationally. He also points out that modernization does not necessarily lead to westernization or the universalization of civilizations. When countries become modern through industrialization, they do not automatically adopt Western values or merge into one shared culture. The West must begin to recognize that attempting to spread Western civilization throughout the rest of the world is fruitless. In the second part, Huntington focuses on the shift away from Western power and toward Asian and Islamic civilizations. A recent religious resurgence has impacted the Islamic world. This has been partly motivated by the alienation that can result from modernization. As people move away from their family structures and into cities to work industrial jobs, they tend to lose their old sense of identity. Without strong family or community ties, religion presents a good alternative for building a new identity. Huntington argues that the rise of Islam makes Muslim civilization less stable overall. It prompts leaders to make religious appeals and youths to mobilize violently around religious causes. However, he points out that the demographic growth of Islamic societies makes them stronger and more able to influence global politics. They are more culturally confident and have the strength to promote that culture. In East Asia, meanwhile, economic growth has brought a similar confidence to countries like China. Non-Western civilizations generally refocus on their own particular cultures while rejecting the West. In the third section, Huntington argues that international politics are reorganizing around the lines of different civilizations. The key players in world affairs are now the 7 civilizations' primary states. Huntington outlines the general structure of civilizations, core states, which are the most robust and most influential members. Member states are aligned with a given civilization, lone countries that are culturally isolated, cleft countries that include more than one influential cultural group, and torn countries that started in one society but have attempted to shift to a different one. Overall, similar cultures cooperate when it comes to international politics. In the fourth section, Huntington explains that the Western desire to dominate the world leads to conflict with Islam and China. China and Islam have gained strength and cultural confidence, so they have been less willing to accept Western dominance. However, the West has continued to try to exert its influence anyway. Moving forward, the West will have to become more accommodating on the key issues that bring it into conflict with China and Islam: militarization, human rights, and the influx of refugees and immigrants in the Western world. Huntington predicts that the West will no longer be able to influence these issues as clearly as it once could. Huntington's last section argues that the West must accept its civilization as unique instead of wanting to make it universal. Above all, it must protect this unique culture from non-Western influence. If the United States continues to embrace multiculturalism, for example, it will eventually lose its central identity as a Western nation. It will no longer be identifiable as the United States but become something closer to the United Nations. Preserving Western culture is also essential to ensure that the world as a whole can maintain the multicivilizational nature of world politics. The West must stop trying to universalize and allow other civilizations to hold on to their unique cultures and values. Only by rejecting multiculturalism and embracing multicivilizationalism can the world avoid conflicts between significant civilizations. The authors of EssayShark will help you analyze the book, write conclusions, and analyze the main characters when you encounter difficulties in your studies. Analyze other books and get the gist you need to study in just a few minutes.